And to do so, let's bring in our panel from our South Florida Newsmax newsroom, Javier Manjarres, the managing editor of the Shark Tank political blog, and checking in from Washington, D.C., the MoveOn.org Washington director and the host of The Good Fight, thus the slingshot logo behind him, a man who knows all about branding, Ben Wikler. Javier, first to you. Are the Cuban people better off today with this deal?
Well, first of all, let's talk about President Obama extending that hand he mentioned. What about the back of the hand he gave to the Cuban dissidents and Cuban exiles here in the United States? Look, the Cuban people have not been without anything. They've had everything they've needed, but the Cuban regime has failed to give them what they've needed because look, they trade with the rest of the world. They don't need the United States. This is just President Obama again just showing us how weak of a president he is, and it sends a bad message. It sends a message that he believes, he condones the atrocities that Castro's committed over the past 50 some odd years, and he supports his communist regime. That's all this is. This is a political ploy, and I think President Obama just wants to win another Nobel Peace Prize in the end.
Well, let's see what Ben has to say.
Well, I don't know if Javier has caught the news, but the Cold War is over and we won. This is a move that has the support of Cuban Americans. 68% of Cuban Americans say they support diplomatic relations with Cuba. And the important thing to remember is that an embassy, diplomatic relations with a country, is a telephone. Ronald Reagan didn't shut down the embassy in Moscow, and no one thinks that he was giving a gift to the Russians. This is something that President Obama is doing to advance our foreign policy objectives and do what's right for the country. I think it's
But in
great.
essence,
so what's next? North Korea? Are we going to put an embassy in North Korea?
Before we get to North Korea, here's the thing, Javier, and it does have to deal with the way we treat communist dictatorships. Right. In essence, has President Obama thrown a huge lifeline to Cuba? Because we understand there was about to be a cutoff from Venezuela, money, oil, all of that. And of course, Venezuela had really been the new donor state, if you will, to Cuba for so many years.
I don't buy it. I don't buy it because Cuba propped up Venezuela. They propped up Chavez. They propped up Maduro. Now they support him. They pretty much control the oil that comes in and out of Venezuela. Look, this is a sham. There's nothing wrong with happening in Cuba. They're having trade with the rest of them. My cousin has gone from Colombia to Cuba at least a dozen times in the past 10, 20 years. And so it happens. You can fly to Cuba from Canada. You can fly to Cuba from Mexico, wherever you want. And the dollars or the euros are still rolling into Canada. They don't into Cuba. They don't need U.S. dollars. This is again a slap in the face of the exile community.
All right. Well, again, let's get Ben's take on it. Ben.
We've had 10 presidents who didn't have relationships with Cuba, who didn't have diplomatic relations, and it has not gotten us where we're trying to go. So at some point, you might want to change course and do something.
But where do we want to go? Tell us, Ben, where do we want to go with Cuba?
We want a free, democratic, open, prosperous Cuba that respects human rights. I think we all want the same thing, the same thing the Cuban people want. And the old way didn't work for 50 years.
Okay, so with this new deal,
that was not a good solution.
The
idea of trying something new at a certain point makes sense. Do you think we should wait 100 years before we try something different?
What has Cuba conceded to the rest of the world with this deal? What do they say they're going to do? They say they're going to allow free democratic elections? No, they haven't said anything. We've got nothing from them.
Here's the other problem, Ben. You know, you talk about wait another 100 years. Well, I don't think that either Raul or Fidel Castro are going to live past their 100th birthday. Time was on our side to see nature take its course. But I'll give you 15 seconds to respond, Ben.
Time is still on our side. The question is, you know, when the Castro era ends, should the United States be part of the conversation about what's next, or should we be unilaterally cutting ourselves off from having any voice in this conversation? I think the answer to that's pretty clear.
Well, we waited out the Russians, and then we spent them to death. So
we
guess
talked
what?
to them all the way through.
Yeah, we also threatened them. They threatened us.
We also moved against them economically in very meaningful ways, depriving them of hard currency and gold and diamonds. Coming back to talk about more issues of importance with Ben Wikler and Javier Manjarres. You stay with us too now on America's Forum.